Hi everybody, this is Lisa. This fun size film is focusing on a process that I call storying and restorying students, and this will put your observation and documentation data to use in an interesting and productive way. Okay, imagine you decide that you want to go skydiving. Of course, you don't want to go by yourself. So, you think, awesome, I'm going to ask my best friend to come with me. Think right about that right now and determine whether or not your best friend would go. And once you do that, think about how you know his or her answer. What's your reasoning or your evidence? What is it that you know about your best friend that enables you to answer the question of whether or not skydiving would be his or her bag? Well, you know your best friend very well. You know his or her likes and dislikes and hopes and fears, and you've had years of repeated exposure that provide evidence that enable you to make this kind of conclusion. So to put it another way, you have created a story or an understanding of who your best friend is as a person, based on all the things that you know and all the things you've experienced together and what you've seen. So you know what's typical behavior for her, what she likes, what she doesn't like, how she's likely to react to something. You know, you're driving her car, you got a ticket, a parking ticket, versus you're driving a car and you crashed. And you know whether or not she'd go skydiving with you. But I'm guessing that you probably have storied your best friend differently than her mom has storied her, because you know different things about your best friend and you have a different relationship with your best friend than the best friend has with the mom. But has your best friend ever done something that surprised you? Something that was totally out of character? Or something that hurt you or hurt your feelings? Typically, in that sort of situation, you'd think, oh my God, that's not like her at all. Arrested for shoplifting? Are you kidding me? Well, your best friend's actions contradicted the story that you've created about her. I've been BFFs with my BFF for 22 years, and if she called me from jail, I would be surprised. My college roommate, who I've known for even longer, if she called me and said she was in jail, I'd have to get in the car and go down there and get her. So when these surprising things happen, you can either ignore it and keep your original story and see the surprising behavior as an outlier, or you can restory your best friend to include this new dimension of her personality that you were not aware of before. It's not that one of these is good and one of them is bad. It's just, it depends on what the situation was and how you chose to integrate it into your thinking. So you knew we'd get to teachers and kids sooner or later. Teachers story their students. When we watched School of Rock, we storied Summer and Zach and Freddie and Lawrence based on the limited evidence that we could get by watching the movie. And we weren't doing it in a malicious way. We were really trying to get an understanding of who these kids were as learners, but we knew that our understanding was going to be partial because we didn't have control over what was shown to us. But if we had seen more facets of those kids, we would have been able to develop much more nuanced and thoughtful stories of these kids as learners. And having a nuanced and thoughtful understanding of your students as learners helps you be a more effective teacher for those particular learners. So when teachers story students, their stories are limited by what they notice and by how they perceive the kids. And sometimes a teacher might label a student as a bully or a brown noser or goody two-shoes or whatever. And once that story is in a teacher's mind, he or she may overlook evidence that shows that the student isn't always a bully. The student is actually having difficulty making friends, and the bullying is a misguided effort to do that. Or the kid who's a brown noser actually is living in a foster home that has a lot of other foster kids in it, and she is really looking for someone to pay attention to her and to let her know that she's a valuable person who has contributions to make in the classroom and in the world. So a student who has been storied in a particular way can always be re-storied in a different way. You can change a child's story by thinking differently about the child and looking for skills rather than deficiencies, and always remaining open to what a child can show you and what you can learn. So I'm going to be sharing some data that were gathered by a former student of mine, a student teacher in Texas years ago. And the official story, the story that was always told about Andrew, this kindergartner, is presented here. He's always off task. He disrupts the class at nap time. He has a short attention span, and he has trouble writing a story that makes logical sense. And this was part of an assignment that was similar to the one that you're doing. And all of these traits or characteristics of his official story were documented with assessment data. And all the assessment data supported these conclusions. So Andrew definitely demonstrated those behaviors and those traits in the classroom. And those traits and behaviors were noted in the official story because they received a lot of the teacher's attention. They were noticeable, they were disruptive, and they were frustrating. And so the student teacher and her master teacher noticed the things that were most obvious. And this assignment required the student teacher to go back and re-story Andrew, either by looking at the data in a new way or by watching him looking for different things. It was an opportunity to see how perceptions can alter students' experiences and their learning. No one can ever tell a true story of a person because everyone's story is partial. Even we story ourselves in ways that foreground certain elements of our personality or our experience and ignore purposefully other aspects of our experience and have unacknowledged issues floating around in our psyche that we don't even know about. So the official story that was constructed by Andrew's teacher and student teacher isn't the only story that could be told about Andrew as a learner. You have to think, well, did Andrew's parents story him that way? Would his soccer coach story him that way? Would his scout troop leader? Andrew probably acts differently in different contexts, depending on his engagement in the activity, the size of the group, the personality of the adult who's leading the situation. Everyone will have a different story. And right now, we don't know how Andrew stories himself. But if his kindergarten teacher keeps telling him he's a naughty boy, he's going to start thinking that he is a naughty boy. So here's the trick about restorying. You need to look beyond the obvious traits. When you're observing and documenting a child's learning and behavior, don't focus exclusively on capturing evidence of what you already expect to find. If your focus student is someone who cuts in line a lot, you can certainly document the focus student doing frontsies, backsies, or whatever kind of cutting he did. But that's not, and you probably could find 30 examples in 30 days of this particular behavior. But that's only one small behavior. And although it creates problems for the class, it might not be really the most significant thing about this kid. So when you're observing and documenting kids, you want to be open to everything you notice. The things that are really typical, the things that surprise you, the things that concern you. You have to be open, and you have to be as generous as you can in your interpretation of what you see. And that's really how you find data to restory a student. Well, it's really easy to buy into the official story, and there's always some truth in the official story. There were data to support all of the traits that my student teacher indicated as being the official story of Andrew. But you can look at your data and think differently about the data. You can think about your focus child, and you can write a different story. And the different story would emphasize traits and behaviors that were overlooked in the official story, or it could reinterpret traits and behaviors that were interpreted as negative in the official story and frame them as positive. And often, once you've developed a new story for a student, you can gather additional data to support that new story, to tell it in a more compelling way. So, just a quick review. Here is Andrew's official story. Andrew is always off task. He disrupts the class at nap time. He has a short attention span, and he has trouble writing a story that makes logical sense. That's the official story. Now, here is Andrew's new story. He's a talented writer. He has lots of knowledge about many things and loves to share. He excels in things having to do with the classroom computers, and he has great social skills and works well with other kids. Sounds like a very different young man. So, just a quick note about what you're going to be seeing. The student teacher who did this project, this story restory project, used two different approaches in restoring Andrew as a learner. She reinterpreted her existing data. The original story had him as a poor writer who couldn't write anything that had logical sense, but this story had him as an enthusiastic writer. So she used the same work samples and interpreted them differently. She also identified and focused on different aspects of Andrew's behavior and achievement, which probably involved gathering some additional data. Okay, so here you're seeing a work sample, picture of the president, and it says, "The president and I like them." And please take a moment to read what the student teacher had to say, and then I'll see you on the next slide. I hope that you can make out his invented spelling, but I've written it out in standard spelling beneath. And this is March of kindergarten. So I think that he has got a lot of literacy skills in place already. More evidence of Andrew the writer. Some of the evidence came from documented conversations, and some came from anecdotal observations. So this last work sample shows not only his use of invented spelling, but also his knowledge of the subject matter. And it says, "Once I saw an excavator and it was digging. A front loader was helping to do work." An excavator and a front loader, apparently, are different kinds of construction trucks or machines. And Andrew was writing about that. While we're on the topic of machines, we'll look at another of Andrew's strengths in this restory. He knows a lot about many different topics. And so the student teacher documents some of the contributions that he made to the class unit on machines. And I just love that second bullet point that a classmate said, "Andrew, now I know why we needed you in our class to teach us about machines." Well, yes, this child, Andrew does disturb people during nap, and he may have a short attention span, but look how much more there is to Andrew as a learner than just those disruptive behaviors. That's not to say that he doesn't have disruptive behaviors, but the official story reduced Andrew down to his most disruptive behaviors and ignored all of this other stuff. Here he is at the computers, and he's working with a classmate, and they don't appear to be crying or fighting. It looks like they're working together nicely. And, as a matter of fact, Andrew gets along well with his classmates. Here he is. He helps kids on the computer. He receives compliments from others during class, and he always has friends to play with. And here he is playing with some other children. Now, you just saw him helping kids, a classmate on the computer, and you know about the compliments that he received during class, that it was important for him to teach the other kids about machines. But the student teacher took those comments or those observations and sort of pulled them together to identify Andrew as someone who has good social skills and who is a desirable friend to hang out with. So, as I said earlier, after restorying Andrew, I'm guessing that the student teacher gathered additional data because, first of all, she wanted to ensure that her restory was accurate. She could not be making assertions that she couldn't support with assessment evidence. And she also needed additional data to support her restory. And she used some of the tools that you're already familiar with to go out and get some extra data to have a more compelling presentation of this new story of Andrew. Well, guess what? I've always made my student teachers reflect. So here, you might not be surprised to see that there was a reflective part of this assignment. And I asked the student teachers to write about the restorying process. And here you see what she had to say, that it was easy to find new ways to see a child if that's what you want to do. She felt that it was a little cheesy to say, "Oh, great social skills," when what she meant was, "He talks constantly." Well, yeah, I could see that. And she kept wondering about how her teacher storied her when she was in kindergarten, and about the impact that those stories may have had on her as a learner and on her as a future teacher. So, why are we talking about storying and restorying students? Well, I'll ask you some questions and we can discuss these in class. I'd like you to think about how this process of restorying might benefit the student who's being restoried, how restorying a student might benefit the teacher, and who else might benefit when a student with a primarily negative story is given a more optimistic and positive restory. Just a few more key points. Restorying isn't about telling lies. It may be cheesy to say that he has strong social skills and is a little chatty, rather than saying he never shuts up. But your restory can't be fiction. Everything that you include in a restory must be supported by evidence and assessment data. And, as we saw earlier, it could be data that were previously interpreted in a very different way. All those writing samples that we saw when we were reading about David being an enthusiastic writer. All of those writing samples were previously evidence of him not being able to write a story that made sense logically. So just by looking for the value in those stories completely changed those work samples. And there may be work samples in your assessment portfolio that might be telling more than one story as well. Restoring really hinges on shifting your focus. You need to find and focus on the student's strengths, positive traits, successes, and potential for more success. And put less emphasis on the student's weaknesses, problematic behaviors, weird quirks, irritating habits. Focus on things that are deeper and more central to the student as a person. Everybody has strengths and everybody has areas for growth. And some kids have a lot of growth areas, but they all have strengths too. And it's up to you as a teacher to try to find them and build on them. So as you're preparing for class on Wednesday, I'd like you to think a little bit about your focus student. I'd like you to think about how you've storied your focus student, who she or he is as a learner, what makes him or her special, what are the kid's biggest strengths, and where does he struggle, and how can you help? And I'd like you to spend some time thinking about whether or not your focus student might benefit from some restorying. And we'll be talking more about this concept in class. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there. Bye-bye.